Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are walking straight into the eye of a storm.
Hmm.
It's a quiet storm. You won't hear thunder outside your window. But if you are currently sitting in a corporate boardroom, a legal department, or an engineering lab, you are definitely getting soaked.
Oh, yeah.
We are talking about the absolute explosion of AI risk frameworks.
It is a torrential downpour of documentation, that is for sure. I was looking at a map of the global regulatory landscape this morning, and honestly, it looked less like a map and more like a spilled bowl of alphabet soup.
That is the perfect visual. It feels like we are living through this unique moment of high-octane anxiety regarding artificial intelligence.
I'd say so.
Everyone, and I mean everyone, from the regulators in Brussels to the consumers in Iowa, wants what we call trustworthy AI.
Right.
We want to know that the chatbot isn't going to hallucinate legal advice that sends us to jail. We want to know the hiring algorithm isn't throwing out resumes because of a zip code. We want to know the self-driving car sees the stop sign.
The desire for safety is universal. That is the easy part. No one is arguing against safety.
Right. But here's the problem. While everyone agrees we need safety, no one seems to agree on the specific recipe for how to bake that safety in.
That is a fair assessment. We have the NIST framework in the U.S., the AI Act in Europe, ISO standards, Canadian legislation, IE standards for engineers. It is a mountain of paper.
It's a Tower of Babel. That is the image I have in my head. A dozen different languages all shouting about risk and governance, but using different words. So help me visualize this.
Okay.
Imagine you are a global company. You operate in New York, London, Berlin, and Toronto. You are trying to build one AI system.
A very common scenario.
Do you need 4 different compliance teams? Is it a nightmare scenario?
It certainly feels like one for many organizations.
Yeah.
The core concern here is what we call interoperability.
Interoperability.
Yeah. If these frameworks don't talk to each other, if risk means one thing in Berlin and a completely different thing in Washington, compliance becomes incredibly expensive and, frankly, ineffective. You spend all your time filling out different forms rather than actually making the system safer.
Which defeats the whole purpose. But, listeners, we have a guide through this wilderness. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a very specific, very helpful document published by the OECD in November 2023. It is titled Common Guideposts to Promote Interoperability in AI Risk Management.
This document is essentially an attempt to create a Rosetta Stone for AI risk. The OECD took all these major global frameworks, the ones we just mentioned, and a few more, and tried to translate them into one common language.
And the goal was to see if they're all saying the same thing underneath it all.
Exactly. Their goal was to see if, beneath the jargon and the different acronyms, these frameworks actually agree with each other.
That is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to walk through this comparison. We're going to look at the master key the OECD created, and then we are going to see how the big players, the EU, the US, ISO map onto it.
And the goal here is operationalizing principles. I think that's the key phrase. We are moving past the phase of just saying AI should be fair and moving into how do we prove it? How do we measure it? How do we document it so it stands up in court?
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can compare the specific rules, we need a baseline. The OECD created what they call the interoperability framework. Think of this as the generic skeleton key.
That's a great way to put it.
What does this foundation look like?
To create this baseline, the OECD analyzed the entire landscape and realized that, regardless of the specific terminology, almost every effective risk management process boils down to 4 main pillars.
Okay.
If you are taking notes or just trying to organize your mental model, these are the big ones. The first is define.
Define. It sounds simple enough, but I suspect there's nuance there.
Well, there is. It is the starting line. You have to define the scope, the context, and the criteria. Who are the actors involved? What phase of the life cycle are we in?
So, what are we actually talking about here?
Exactly. You can't manage a risk if you haven't defined the boundaries of the system. Think of it like building a house. Before you worry about fire safety, you need to know, are we building a wood cabin or a concrete skyscraper? Where is it located? Who's living there?
That makes sense. You can't assess the risk of a system if you don't know where the system begins and ends.
Precisely. And in AI, this is tricky. Is the system just the algorithm?
Or is it the data it was trained on?
Exactly. Or is it the algorithm plus the data, plus the user interface, plus the human operator making the final decision? The defined phase is where you draw those lines. You have to be incredibly explicit about it.
So step 1 is drawing the map. Step 2.
Step 2 is assess. This is where you identify the risks to trustworthy AI.
And when we say trustworthy, we weren't just using a marketing buzzword.
No, not at all. The OECD is very specific here. We are talking about human rights, safety, fairness, transparency. In the assess phase, you are analyzing the likelihood of harm and the severity of that harm.
This is the detective work. You're looking for the cracks in the foundation before you pour the cement.
That's a perfect analogy. And you are asking the hard questions. If this model fails, does someone lose money? Or does someone lose their liberty? Does a loan get denied? Or does a car crash?
And those are obviously very different assessments requiring very different tools.
Hugely different. A financial risk model is not the same as a human rights impact assessment. You need to know which lens to use. And that comes from the assess phase.
So, define the playing field, assess what could go wrong. Step 3.
Step 3 is treat. This is the action phase. You have identified a risk. Now, what do?
You don't just write it in a report and file it away.
Please no. You treat it. You stop the activity, you prevent the harm, or you mitigate the bad stuff to a level that is acceptable.
Treat sounds very medical, like we have diagnosed a disease and now we are prescribing the medicine.
That's a good analogy. Sometimes the treatment is surgery. You cut out a feature of the AI because it's too dangerous. Sometimes it's just a bandage. You add a warning label or a human-in-the-loop requirement. But you have to do something. You can't just admire the risk.
I love that phrase, admire the risk. I've seen a lot of that happen.
We all have.
And finally, the fourth pillar.
The fourth pillar is govern. And this is the wrapper around everything else.
So this isn't a final step then?
No, not at all. Governance isn't just a step you do at the end. It is the culture, the monitoring, the documentation, and the communication. It is how an organization ensures that the define, assess, and treat steps are actually happening and being overseen by humans who are accountable.
It's the who's in charge and how do we prove we did it part of the equation.
Exactly. It's the accountability layer. Who signs off on this? Where are the records? How do we communicate with stakeholders? Without govern, the other 3 steps are just an academic exercise.
Define, assess, treat, govern. It sounds logical. But does this apply to the whole timeline of an AI? I feel like sometimes people think AI is just coding.
That is a crucial point, and it's one of the biggest misconceptions we see. The interoperability framework applies to the entire AI lifecycle. We are talking about planning and design.
Before you've even written a line of code.
Before you've even hired the developer, maybe. Then data collection, building the model, verification, deployment, and crucially, operation and monitoring.
So it doesn't stop at launch day.
You don't stop managing risk just because you launch the product. The world changes, your data drifts, new vulnerabilities are found.
Yeah.
It has to be continuous.
Right. It's not a set it and forget it technology. It evolves, the data changes, the world changes. So we have our Rosetta Stone. Define, assess, treat, govern.
That's our master key.
Now, let's see how the real-world frameworks stack up against this. The first one on our list is the OECD's own Due Diligence Guidance for Responsible Business Conduct, or DDG for short.
The DDG is interesting because it is sector agnostic. It's not just for tech companies, it's for anyone. It is built on the idea of responsible business conduct.
Which sounds like something every business should aspire to, regardless of whether they are selling software or sneakers.
Ideally, yes. The core philosophy here is that companies need to proactively avoid harm. But the DDG has a very specific lens. It views the world through business relationships and supply chains.
That is a distinct perspective. It's not just looking at the code you wrote in your basement. It's looking at who you are doing business with.
Exactly. Who's your cloud provider?
Yeah.
Who sold you your data set? Who are you selling your API to? That's the lens.
So how well does that map to our 4 pillars?
When we map the DDG to our Rosetta Stone, the interoperability framework, it aligns very closely. It has steps for identifying adverse impacts, which maps to assess. It has steps for ceasing or preventing impacts, which maps to treat. It's all very recognizable.
But there are some unique features here, right? I noticed the DDG talks a lot about remedy.
That is the standout feature of the DDG. It explicitly includes a step for remediation.
What's the difference between that and treat?
Treat is about preventing future harm. Remedy is about fixing past harm. The logic is, if you break it, you have to help fix it.
Oh, I see.
In the main interoperability framework, fixing things is generally grouped under treat, but the DDG pulls it out and highlights it. It says, if you cause an adverse impact, you have a responsibility to provide for or cooperate in remediation.
That feels much more active than just mitigating risk. Mitigating risk sounds like legal cover. Remediation implies a moral responsibility to the victim of the harm.
It does. And that links back to the scope. The DDG looks at risks a company might contribute to through its business relationships.
Okay, give me an example.
So imagine you are a bank. You buy an AI tool from a third-party vendor to screen loan applicants. You didn't build it. But if that vendor used biased data that discriminates against a certain demographic,
And your bank denies loans based on that?
right, the DDG framework suggests you have some responsibility there.
Mm.
You are linked to that harm. You contributed to it by using the tool.
That is a heavy burden, but an important one in a global supply chain. It prevents you from just washing your hands and saying, "Don't look at me, I just bought the license."
It's designed to stop exactly that kind of finger pointing.
What about the governance piece? How does the DDG handle that?
It handles it slightly differently. In the interoperability framework, consulting and documenting are distinct parts of governance. In the DDG, those are lumped under a step called embed.
Embed. I like that word.
The idea is that you embed responsible business conduct into your policies and management systems. It shouldn't be a separate department. It should be how everyone works.
So it suggests it needs to be part of the DNA, not just a layer of frosting on top?
Precisely. Consultation and documentation are seen as part of the company culture, part of the embed process, rather than separate standalone actions you check off a list.
Okay, so that's the business conduct lens. Let's move to the heavy hitters of the standard world, ISO. Specifically, ISO 31000 and the new AI-specific patch, ISO IEC 23894. Now, whenever I hear ISO, I think of manufacturing. I think of standard screw sizes.
That's fair. That's their heritage. And ISO 31000 is the big generic standard for risk management. It is used by oil companies, banks, construction firms, everyone. It is the gold standard for general risk.
And ISO IEC 23894 is the specific update for AI.
Think of it as a supplement or a plugin. It takes the generic structure of ISO 31000 and adds the AI context, saying, hey, when you think about risk, here are some new AI-specific things to consider, like bias and explainability.
So when we look at alignment with our 4 pillars, how does it stack up?
It's very strong. ISO defines the scope, assesses the risk, and treats the risk. The mechanics are very similar to our Rosetta Stone. Very logical, very process-oriented.
But I'm sensing a however coming. You have that look on your face.
There is a however, and it lies in the embed distinction again. ISO views leadership and commitment, which corresponds to embed, as the framework that holds the process, rather than a step in the process.
Wait, explain that to me. What is the difference between the framework and the process?
Okay, imagine a house. The process, identifying and fixing risks, is what you do inside the house. Cooking dinner, cleaning the floors.
Got it.
The framework, the leadership commitment, is the foundation and the walls of the house itself. ISO says leadership provides the structure in which risk management happens. It is a subtle distinction, but it emphasizes that without leadership buy-in, the process can't exist.
So you can't cook dinner if you don't have a kitchen.
Exactly. If the CEO doesn't care, the risk team is just shouting into the void. The walls of the house aren't there.
That makes sense. But I recall there being a more philosophical difference with ISO, particularly regarding who is at risk.
This is the crucial distinction, and if listeners take away one thing about ISO, it should be this. ISO 31000 traditionally focuses on risks to the organization.
To the company itself.
Yes, it is about value protection. It asks, what could hurt our company's bottom line? What could hurt our reputation? What could stop us from achieving our objectives?
So a risk in ISO terms is a risk to the company, not necessarily a risk to the public.
Historically, yes, that is the lens. And this leads to some interesting outcomes in the treat phase. In ISO, a valid way to treat a risk is to retain the risk.
Meaning do nothing.
Right. Or even increase the risk if it pursues a business opportunity.
Whoa. Stop there. So under ISO 31000, you could theoretically say, this AI model is a bit biased, and it might make some people angry, but it's going to make us $1 billion, so we accept the risk.
In a pure business risk calculation, yes, that is a possible outcome. If the potential profit outweighs the potential lawsuit or PR hit, a purely economic risk model might say go for it.
Huh.
It views risk as uncertainty on objectives, and sometimes you embrace uncertainty to get a reward.
That sounds distinctly dystopian when applied to AI harms.
That is why the AI supplement, ISO IEC 23894, is so important.
It tries to fix this loophole.
It tries to fix this by widening the scope. It explicitly brings in societal risks, human rights, and well-being. It says, okay, business risk managers, you also need to think about these other things. It tries to push the ISO model closer to the OECD view, where risk includes risk to others, not just risk to the bank account.
That is a massive shift. It changes the whole equation from, is this profitable, to, is this right?
Precisely. And that tension between business risk and societal risk is at the heart of the interoperability challenge. Because if one regulator is asking for business risk assessment and another is asking for human rights assessment, you're fundamentally looking at two different maps.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic and look at the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, or the AI RMF. This is the big one out of the United States.
The NIST framework has gained a lot of traction. It is voluntary, outcome-focused, and non-prescriptive.
What do you mean by non-prescriptive?
It doesn't tell you exactly how to code or which specific tool to use. It tells you what outcomes to aim for, like your system should be explainable. It leaves the how up to the organization.
So it's very popular in the tech sector because it feels agile?
Exactly. And it has catchy names for its steps.
It does. The core steps are map, measure, manage, and govern. Let's match those up to our Rosetta Stone. MAP is define.
Correct. MEMI matches define. You are mapping the context and the actors. You are exploring the landscape.
Measure is assess.
Yes. You are measuring the risks. You are quantifying the uncertainty. It's very data-driven.
And manage is treat.
Exactly. You manage the risks you have measured.
And govern is?
Govern. It is almost a perfect one-to-one mapping with the OECD framework. But NIST does something visually and structurally interesting with governance.
I've seen the graphic for this. It's a circle, right?
Yes. In the NIST model, govern is the central hub of the wheel. Map, measure, and manage, surrounded as spokes.
So what's the significance of that structure?
The idea is that the govern function is chemically bonded to everything else. You don't just govern as a separate step. You govern while you are mapping. You govern while you are measuring. You govern while you are managing.
So you can't escape it. It's the engine in the middle driving the whole car.
That is the intent. It's meant to be pervasive. NIST also gets very specific about impacts. It breaks them down into 3 buckets.
Right. I saw this. Harm to people, harm to organizations, and harm to ecosystems.
Yes. And that third one is really interesting.
Harm to ecosystems, like the environment, carbon emissions from training data.
Yes, environmental impact is part of it, but ecosystem here is broader. It includes the broader information ecosystem.
So like disinformation.
Exactly. It acknowledges that an AI might not hurt a specific person physically, it might not break your arm, but it could pollute the information environment with disinformation, which harms the ecosystem of democracy.
Or it could destabilize a financial market.
Or that's a classic ecosystem harm.
That is a very modern way of looking at risk. It's not just, did the robot step on my foot? It's, did the bot farm poison the election discourse?
Precisely. NIST is trying to capture those second-order effects. It recognizes that AI operates in a complex system, and sometimes the damage is systemic, not individual.
So far, we have looked at voluntary frameworks and guidance. NIST is voluntary. ISO is a standard. DDG is guidance. Now, let's get serious. Let's talk about the law. The EU AI Act.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
The EU AI Act is a proposed regulation moving rapidly toward full implementation. It is not a suggestion. It is the law.
And its reach is huge.
If you want to do business in the EU, a market of 450 million wealthy consumers, you follow this. It applies to providers, distributors, and importers. It has real teeth.
The most famous part of the EU Act is the pyramid, right? The risk pyramid.
It's a very effective way to visualize their approach. Imagine a pyramid divided into levels. At the very top, you have unacceptable risk.
These are the things that are just banned, period. Do not pass go.
Correct. These are applications that the EU has decided are fundamentally incompatible with European values.
Like what? What's on the ban list?
Things like social scoring systems by governments, like what we see in parts of China. Or AI that uses subliminal techniques to distort behavior and cause harm. Or real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces by law enforcement, with some very specific exceptions. The EU says, these are too dangerous, you cannot do them.
Okay, so that's the peak. What's the next layer down?
The next layer is high risk. This is the bulk of the regulation. These are systems that are allowed, but they are heavily regulated.
So this is where most of the compliance work is going to be.
Absolutely. This includes things like AI in critical infrastructure, transport, water, energy, AI in education grading exams, assigning students to schools, AI in employment sorting resumes, or AI in law enforcement and migration control.
So if I'm building an AI to sort resumes for a job at a supermarket, I'm in the high-risk category.
Most likely, yes, because you are impacting someone's livelihood. And because you are high risk, you have to do the full interoperability dance. Identify, which is define. evaluate, which is assess, and mitigate, which is treat.
And below high risk.
You have limited risk, which mostly requires transparency, telling people they're talking to a bot, and then minimal risk, which is everything else like spam filters or video games. Those have almost no obligations.
So how does this map to our OECD Rosetta Stone? The core seems to be there for high risk.
The alignment on define, assess, and treat for high-risk systems is very strong. The law explicitly requires you to do these things. You have to have a risk management system. However, there is a gap in the governance section.
Really? I would have thought a law would be heavy on governance.
It is heavy on compliance,
Yeah.
ticking the boxes, filing the reports, but it is lighter on the soft side of governance. The outline notes that things like consulting stakeholders and embedding culture are not explicitly required in the law text in the same way they are in the voluntary standards.
That is an interesting distinction.
The law cares that you documented the risk. It cares less about whether you held a town hall meeting with your employees about it. The law checks the output, not necessarily the internal cultural process.
And there is one other massive difference, isn't there? About who decides what's risky.
Yes. This is maybe the biggest difference of all. In the voluntary frameworks, like NIST or ISO, the company decides if a risk is high. You do the assessment, and you say, wow, this is risky.
Right. You make the judgment call.
In the EU AI Act, the law tells you if you are high risk. It's a list. If you are on the list, you are high risk. It doesn't matter if you think your resume sorter is harmless and perfectly fair. The EU has decided resume sorting is high risk.
So it acts as a de facto risk prioritization.
Precisely. The regulator does the definition work for you.
That takes the guesswork out of it, but it also removes some agency from the company. It's rigid.
It provides certainty, but yes, it lacks flexibility.
Yeah.
If you invent a new type of AI that isn't on the list but is incredibly dangerous, it might technically be unregulated until they update the list.
Whereas a principles-based framework like NIST would catch it immediately.
Potentially, yes.
Let's look at the EU's neighbor to the west, Canada. The Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, or AID.
ADA is very much a cousin to the EU model. It regulates design, development, and making systems available. It's part of a broader push to update Canada's privacy and data laws.
Does it align with the OECD framework, the core functions?
It does. It focuses heavily on identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks. It's very standard in that regard. The language is all very familiar.
But are there missing pieces?
Similar to the EU, the governance elements are thinner. It mentions documenting procedures, you have to write down what you did, but it is unclear who gets to see those documents or if stakeholders must be consulted.
So it's a bit of a black box. We documented it. It's in a file cabinet somewhere.
Potentially. It focuses on compliance measures rather than embedding culture. It is about following the rules to avoid a fine, not necessarily changing the organizational mindset to be more ethical.
And that is a common critique of hard regulation versus soft law.
It is. Hard regulation gets compliance, but does it get buy-in? That's the eternal question.
Moving on to a different kind of organization, we're going back to Europe, but not the EU, the Council of Europe.
Distinct from the European Union, yes. The Council of Europe focuses on human rights. They have a framework with a fantastic acronym, HUDERIA.
HUDERIA. It sounds like a flower, or maybe a disease.
It stands for Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law, Risk and Impact Assessment.
That is a mouthful, but it tells you exactly what they care about. This isn't about profit, and it's not just about physical safety. It's about democracy.
Exactly. The scope is very specific, protecting human rights and the rule of law. And the process flow is fascinating because it is strictly chronological.
Walk us through the steps.
It starts with COBRA.
COBRA, another great acronym. Are they doing this on purpose?
Possibly. COBRA stands for Context-Based Risk Analysis. This is your defined step. You analyze the context before you do anything else.
Yeah.
Then you move to SEP, Stakeholder Engagement Process. This maps to the consult and assess parts of the framework. You talk to the people who might be affected.
So it really emphasizes that consultation piece.
Very heavily. And then comes HUDERIA itself, the actual impact assessment. And finally, IMP, the Impact Mitigation Plan, which is the treat phase.
COBRA, SEP, HUDERIA, MP. It sounds like a military operation.
It is very structured. But what is interesting is the target audience. This framework feels directed at working-level teams, project managers, developers, the people on the ground.
It's a how-to guide for the people doing the work.
Yes, as opposed to the board of directors. And that leads to the expert critique here. It lacks the govern layer found in the interoperability framework.
How so?
It doesn't explicitly ask for leadership commitment or public communication of conformity. It is a tool for the trenches, not necessarily a map for the boardroom.
That is a critical distinction. You can have a great team using Hudaria executing Cobra perfectly, but if the CEO doesn't care and cuts the budget, it might not matter.
Exactly. Grassroots ethics can only go so far without executive air cover.
Okay, let's talk about the people actually building this stuff. The engineers, we have the IE 7021 standard.
The IEE standard is for the engineers. It addresses ethical concerns during system design. This isn't about legal compliance. This is about how you build a product.
The vibe here is different, right? It's not about ticking boxes, it's about innovation.
It is about product creation. It treats ethics as a design parameter, just like battery life or processing speed. It wants to make ethical a feature, not a bug.
How does the process work?
It starts with concept exploration, which is identifying values. That maps to define. Then value elicitation, prioritizing those values. That maps to assess.
Value elicitation. That sounds intense.
It is. It asks, what do we care about? Privacy, fairness, speed. You can't have it all. You have to prioritize.
Yeah.
And that's a tough conversation.
And then what?
Then comes ethical risk-based design.
Ethical risk-based design. That sounds cool. What does it mean?
It means translating values into engineering specs. If you value privacy, how do you translate that into code? Do you use differential privacy? Do you use encryption? It turns a vague value into a concrete engineering requirement. That is the treat phase.
So instead of a law saying don't be racist, this standard asks the engineer to define fairness in math and code it in.
Exactly. And a unique feature here is that it treats value setting as a form of risk mitigation. It is very flexible. It doesn't rely on laws to tell you what is risky. It asks you to define your ethical values first and then design around them.
That seems very empowering for the creators, but is there a downside?
The challenge is mapping governance here. It is a design process, not an organizational oversight chart.
Right.
It doesn't tell you how to structure your board or how to report to shareholders. It tells you how to build a better widget. It assumes the organization wants to build an ethical widget.
We have one more framework to map, and this one feels a bit old school. ISO-IC Guide 51.
This is the grandfather of safety guides. It is a guide for writing other standards regarding product safety.
And the scope here is very physical, right?
Very physical. Injury or damage to health, property, or environment. Think. Robot arms swinging and hitting a worker, battery pack exploding, a self-driving truck crashing into a wall.
So it's not worried about whether the AI is biased against a certain demographic.
Not unless that bias causes the battery to explode. It completely ignores human rights as a concept. It is about safety and injury. It's a product of its time.
But does it fit the Rosetta Stone, the core process?
Surprisingly well for the basics. It maps to define, assess, and treat, which it calls risk reduction. It even includes validation, which is a form of monitoring. The basic DNA is there.
But the gap is obvious.
The gap is the modern world. It misses the governance elements like consulting stakeholders or embedding culture. It assumes a world where risks are physical and predictable, not digital and sociopolitical.
It's from a time when safety meant wearing a hard hat, not protecting a democracy.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So we have walked through the Museum of Frameworks. We have seen the Business Guide, DDG, the Risk Standard, ISO, the Voluntary Framework, NIST, the laws, eCanada, the Human Rights Assessment, UDRIA, the Engineering Standard, IEE, and the Safety Guide, Guide 51. The big question is, do they talk to each other?
The verdict is mostly, yes.
Mostly.
All frameworks generally agree on the core flow. You have to define what you are doing, assess the risk, and treat the risk. If a company builds a robust risk process based on those three steps, they are likely 80% of the way to complying with all of these frameworks.
That is reassuring. The core work is the same. You aren't reinventing the wheel every time.
No, the core functions are equivalent. However, the friction comes in two places. First, governance.
The wrapper.
Yes, some treat it as a separate boss, like the OECD, some mix it in, like NIST, and some barely mention it, like the laws. If you are a global company, navigating these different governance expectations is where the headache will be. You might need a chief AI officer for NIST, but just a compliance lawyer for the EU.
And the second?
Scope mismatch. This is the biggest trap. If you use ISO, you might be looking at business risk. If you use Hudaria, you are looking at human rights. If you use Guide 51, you are looking at physical safety.
So you could be doing everything right according to one framework and still be completely non-compliant with another.
You could pass an ISO audit and fail a Hudiria assessment completely because you were looking at the wrong kind of risk.
That is a crucial takeaway for our listeners. Just because you are managing risk doesn't mean you are managing the right risk for every jurisdiction.
Yeah.
You have to check your lens.
Exactly. And the terminology is still a mess. The report highlights that we need to agree on what words mean. What does explainability actually mean?
Right.
Is it technical transparency showing the code? Or is it a user-friendly explanation telling the applicant why they were rejected? We still don't fully agree.
And the next steps from the report suggest creating an interactive online tool to help companies navigate this map. I think a lot of people would pay good money for that tool right now.
It is desperately needed. We also need to map the actors in the value chain. Who is responsible for what? The developer, the deployer, the data provider. That is the next frontier of confusion.
So bringing it all home, we have gone from a Tower of Babel to, well, maybe a rough translation guide.
We have. The world is converging on a standard way to handle AI risk, even if the dialects differ. We are moving toward a consensus that you can't just release code into the wild without checking if it bites.
It is reassuring to me that despite the noise, everyone is basically asking the same three questions. What are you building? How could it hurt someone? And what are you doing to stop it?
That is the core of it. And here's a final thought on how these fit together. The laws, like the EU and Canada, provide the what? They draw the hard lines. They tell you where the cliffs are.
Okay.
The standards like ISO and NIST provide the how. They give you the management techniques. They aren't competitors. They are puzzle pieces. You need both.
That is a great way to frame it. The law sets the speed limit. The standard teaches you how to drive the car.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you need to know both to get home safely.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We have spent an hour talking about frameworks designed to catch risks. Define, assess, treat. It's very logical, it's very bureaucratic, it's very 20th century process management applied to 21st century magic. But here's the question. We have built these structures to catch the risks we know: bias, safety, privacy. But are these bureaucratic structures agile enough to catch the unforeseen risks of an AI that changes faster than we can print a PDF?
That is the billion-dollar question. Can a static framework manage a dynamic, evolving intelligence? I suppose we will find out.
On that cheery note, thank you for listening to this deep dive into AI risk frameworks. We hope you feel a little more interoperable than you did an hour ago.
Stay safe out there.
See you next time.